This panel is so poppin' that everyone wants to be on stage for this one. All right, here we go. Hey, everybody. I'm Zach Seward. I'm an editor at CoinDesk. We're leaning into the meme here, and we're calling this one, Can the Devs Do Something? We've all been there in that state of panic. It's not about the state of panic, but it's about devs, so why not go meme-y? Here we go. All right, we're going to do a quick intro from each of these fine panelists, just to let you know where they're coming from to situate this conversation in context. We're going to keep it peppy, fun. We're going to get you to happy hour and beyond before you know it. All right. Starting at the end of the line, introduce yourself, sir.
Hi, everyone. I'm Diran, and I lead engineering at Messari.
Hi, everybody. I'm Abbey. I'm the head of community and default DevRel at Radicle, which is a peer-to-peer stack for building software together.
Hey, everyone. My name is Robbie Kruszynski. I'm the lead of developer relations at BlockDaemon.
Oh, hell yeah. Look at that. Did you pay those people to do that? Nice. Good work. Thanks, Hype Squad. All right, cool. So I just want to give a quick shout out to Electric Capital's annual developer report. It comes out every January, came out last month. Really great trove of data on the current scene of Web3 development. Going to pull some numbers from that during this talk. But first of all, I'm tasking each of these people to do a couple sentences, state of the union, as it relates to Web3 developers right now at this point in time. So I'm going to start with you. If you had to sum up the state of the union as it relates to Web3 development, how would you characterize the current scene?
I think to kind of quickly summarize my thoughts on this, I think we have a lot of very excited developers that are pushing deep into this space, but what I think we need to focus on is making sure that we have tooling that can continue to allow developers to develop at a faster rate. So for me, the importance of tooling is going to be the future, and that's going to help when it comes to overall developer adoption for Web3.
Got you. Abby, from where Radicle sits, what's the feel right now?
I mean, I think that it's telling. We've been coming to ETH Denver a couple of years now, and we're just saying how crazy it is compared to a couple of years ago. The interest, the excitement, the engagement, I think, is higher than ever. And I think now shit's kind of working as well, so like that's good. We're kind of building stuff that's working, but now we're entering kind of like this make or break phase where one, we have to keep and continue attracting. We have to formalize. We have to continue to develop tooling to retain and keep, I think moving the developer ecosystem forward instead of just getting bogged down with building new stuff. So I think that there's a maturation that we need to see, if that's a word. We need to mature a little bit and kind of get our shit together to keep all of this new excitement in and engaged.
Got it. And Diran from Messari, what is the state of the union as it relates to Web3 development right now?
Well, I think it's fair to say that we're seeing a shift in momentum between Web 2 to Web 3. We're seeing more and more developers go from Web 2 to Web 3, and that's because there's a fundamental difference in incentives between Web 2 and Web 3. In Web 2, you're building against a closed system. So you don't have data agency. You don't own the data that you're building against. I think we all are on social media. We all post our fitness data maybe upstream, but none of that data we actually own as a user and a consumer. And that incentive changes drastically going to Web 3, where that data ownership is front and center, and that openness is very attractive to developers building in an open system, but also migrating away from this old paradigm, which is I need to build for a big tech company as opposed to building for a community.
All right, guys, so here's where we go to the data for a little bit. It's been a year of staggering growth in terms of monthly active developers committing code to Web3 protocols. According to Electric Capital, 75% growth in 2021 alone. But the raw number is still very small. We're talking about like 14,000 monthly active developers committing code to Ethereum and other smart contract blockchains. So I guess the question is, Robbie, I'm going to put this to you. How do you think we sort of catalyze and kickstart that next level that you mentioned, Abby, to get more developers who are already existing in the Web 2 world to learn and lend their strengths to Web 3 development?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's a great question. And again, I'm just going to keep banging the drum of tooling, right? And so what we need to do is we need to create faster, more protocol agnostic tooling that's going to allow for developers who are interested to build to very quickly spin things up. Something I think a lot about is, let's say, this abstraction of adoption. And so we go from hyper curious to interested to neutral to uninterested to against, right? And so feedback loops for tooling becomes very important. The people who are hyper curious, they are going to explore all the tooling and everything, regardless of how easy it is to use, simply because they're very bullish, right? But as we start to get toward that neutral and the interested or perhaps the uninterested, that tooling needs to have very low friction. And in order to get to this low friction state, developers need to have a funnel in which they could give proper feedback to the engineers that are making this tooling. So this pinwheel of, let's say developer and engineer responsibility needs to start spinning faster, so developers that are using things have the ability to very quickly tell the engineers, this is what's working, this is not what's working. Engineers can iterate on that, and this cycle continues again and again until we push the needle forward even faster.
Yeah, I think that cycles thing is really interesting because there's actually kind of metacycles happening in at least blockchain protocol ecosystems, because we also have then the feedback loops with the developers building on top of Ethereum, and then the feedback loops there. And so I feel like it's making sure that internally within project ecosystems, you're maintaining those feedback loops, you're really leaning into them, and you're formalizing tooling, you're documenting, you're creating accessibility. And then in terms of your relationship to the ecosystem, we're also keeping very tight feedback loops and how what we're building can be better based off of, how our infrastructure can be better for what we're building. So I think uniquely we have this space where we're also all building with each other. And so I feel creating more modes of feedback loops between developers across different protocol ecosystems within specific blockchain realms is also something that we could lean into. And then how that relates to other blockchain realms is like tremendously important, because that's really going to be crossing the chasm, right? Is when we all envision, most of us envision a multi-chain future. And so how can we kind of also steward that within our ecosystems?
Love the word realms. I want to riff on that a little bit more. So from where you sit at Messari, obviously Ethereum is the top dog in terms of Ethereum count, but clearly some other upstart chains are emerging in terms of capturing developer interest. What are you seeing in terms of other networks that are building developer counts in a meaningful way?
Yeah, so in terms of, piggybacking on this, I think EVM compatible chains are super developer friendly because it has the time it's been battle tested for many years now, the Ethereum tooling. And any chain that is EVM compatible has that tooling sort of compounding effect behind it. But we also see, the way that I see it is there's three general buckets. There's the EVM compatible bucket, which has very mature tooling, so to speak. There's the second bucket, which is the Solana bucket, or move fast and break things. So in order to get their edge, I need to be able to break a lot of shit. And that's okay in the Solana world. And Solana has invested a lot in terms of developer documentation and onboarding. And the third bucket, I would say, is the IBC aspect, the Cosmos ecosystem, where if I build something, then I can bridge it across to a different chain. And that's the third dimension that it's sort of attracting the developers. So you sort of have that spectrum, and all three have interesting aspects.
Yeah, and I guess you go to DeFi Llama and you see it, right? The developer count sort of mirrors TVL on these networks, and EVM is still, the big dog when it comes to what's actually being used. Robbie, I want to put this question to you as we talk about this multi-chain thing. Do you think EVM compatibility, or sort of this idea of like EVM maximalism, will continue on into the future in the near term? Or in the medium term, I guess?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Ultimately, I personally believe that the future is going to be very open to cross-protocol adaptability, right? I think that the EVM is clearly a staple, and I think that building upon it, to your point, that tooling has been battle tested and it's tried and true, and now different protocols and, people are experimenting very quickly in avenues that they think are going to perhaps, again, push this needle forward, get more people developing, get faster adoption. Right, but in my opinion, the future is just cross-protocol, and there might be a point where you're not even sure, perhaps, like what you're on, and you won't necessarily have to.
So, Abby, when you are onboarding folks into the Radicle community, where are you finding those folks? Like, what is what is the source of the shadowy supercoders out there? Where are you going to make that top of the funnel more full?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's coming from many different places. I wouldn't say that there's one. It's probably just a culmination of all of them. I mean, it's anything from hackathons where you're getting one-on-one experiences and actually putting your tech in front of people and saying, hey, this is what you could build, contextualizing it and giving them the space to kind of explore. And I think we learned so much from people learning about Radicle and then using it and trying to incorporate it into their own projects. I actually find that we find a lot of great contributors across ecosystems. Radicle is a hybrid project in a way, right? We have, at its core is actually a peer-to-peer network that's built on top, a peer-to-peer protocol that's built on top of Git. So it's actually crypto-based but not blockchain, right? And Radicle's unique because it takes that unique peer-to-peer data and actually links it to our Ethereum identities. So we actually border two worlds, right? We have this very traditional FOSS peer-to-peer ecosystem along the likes of DApp protocol, Scuttlebutt, and these hacker communities, which you can really tap into. And when you have something that's ideologically driven, that's something that's really attractive to developers, and that's kind of where developers start. Our kind of developer interest started. But since then, it's about tapping into different people's developer communities and figuring out what you can build together. We have a lot of cross-collaboration with Ceramic and the Graph. Like, how can we kind of be creating this patchwork of Web3 technology in which, it's not just about our independent protocol ecosystem, but we're growing the developer communities of each other by building tech that we can build off of ourselves, right? And so I feel like that's really kind of key. And so we try to support those protocol ecosystem collaborations as much as we can.
Got you. Robbie, I'm going to put you on the spot for this one, but I want your perspective as well. So there's the emergence of all these really big, really valuable developer platforms. BlockDaemon is one of them, Infura is another, Alchemy also valued through the roof. Everyone's raising a bunch of money. Investors believe that these are going to be big companies for the long run. What's the smart way to interpret the emergence of these big developer platform firms?
Yeah, I mean, I'll speak on BlockDaemon, of course. What we're trying to do is reduce developer friction, right? And so Ubiquity, for example, is going to be the API that's going to have a single endpoint that's going to allow you to connect to multiple protocols. And to then kind of iterate on what I was speaking about earlier when it comes to making sure that we're listening to the developers. Every protocol that we're pushing forward in terms of Ubiquity, which will just be a single endpoint, and I know that other companies are doing the same, trying to essentially create aggregators of aggregators that allow you as a developer to reduce your tech debt and to develop faster and faster. And this touches on my earlier point of now it's about tooling that is going to allow for developer speed. So I think why there's a lot of value in this is because it's becoming protocol agnostic. And I think that this is the future, and a lot of people believe because there's so much effort across so many protocols, let's just allow developers to communicate and pull the data they need very easily.
Got it. So devil's advocate, right? That could create a situation where it's sort of platform dependency for a lot of developer activity in the space. Is that something that you guys have any thoughts on the emergence of these big platforms?
I was just going to say, the protocol agnostic aspect of this is so important, right? Because, I mean, at least for Radicle, most projects start out with a product, a solution to a problem, right? And it develops, and it's MVPs, and it launches, and it's there, and it's solving a certain problem. And then I think in the Web3 space, what happens is that product is usually built on a protocol, and then the product actually becomes the protocol. And then you realize that it's about building out the resiliency and developing the protocol ecosystem, not just the ecosystem of that initial use case that you started. And we had this, right? And that transition from being product-focused, app-focused, experience-focused to protocol-focused is something that takes a way different relationship to developers. And it's a transformation, and it takes a lot of different work. And so I feel like over the last 6 months, that's really what we've been focusing on, which is how do we make our stack more easy to build on, right? While also powering up the use cases and showing people what you can do. And that's when community and DevRel split, I think, and turn into growth, product, and then DevRel and development, and I think protocol management in the developer perspective, product management in the developer perspective, and then community is what I think ties those together and tries to keep the interactions going, fluid, tighten the feedback loops and all of that. So it's definitely interesting, different scopes, and I think that that's what's so unique and possibly sometimes a hindrance to our ability to kind of create developer ecosystems, but net, we're going to have stronger, more resilient, larger developer ecosystems if we can transform our ecosystems to be less platform and more protocol focused.
competition is good. Competition is great. So for many years, the entire Web3 economy basically sat on the back of Infura, right? We love Infura. Infura powered basically 90% of our dApps out there. But obviously, we don't want to rely on one central source. So competition like Alchemy, BlockDaemon, Bison Trails, this is all great. And for dApp developers too, it's also not a moat in a sense because they're all RPC based. So if I'm a dApp developer, I can very easily transfer my code from calling to Infura to Alchemy tomorrow and vice versa. So competition is always great, and at the end of the day, the community benefits.
I totally +1 that competition is healthy, right? And in my opinion, where someone could perhaps take the lead in terms of that competition, again, is keeping an ear to the ground and making sure that they are listening to the feedback from the developers. And so, in my opinion, the future is, I mean, developers are here and they're building like crazy, and it's incredible. Adoption of Web3, inevitable. But now what we have to do is make sure that developers have that megaphone, right? And they have to also have the ability to point that in the right direction for them to be heard. If everyone has a megaphone, they're pointing this in different directions, this becomes noise. That noise is, again, just going to contribute to tech debt because this feedback loop starts to break. But if we can ideally through community, through adoption of Web 2 to Web 3, through developer relations, create these funnels that are going to allow for a very streamlined mechanism that also combats developer fatigue, volunteer fatigue, giving developers that voice to empower themselves and to use these tools. The company that really believes in the developers, in my opinion, is the company that's going to pull forward.
Gotcha. Good notes all around. Very good perspective all around. Thank you so much for that. Diran, I'm going to put this one to you first. Let's talk about the hiring picture for Web3 devs, right? We talk about the interest, the excitement. Big, giant companies want to build apps on various public blockchain networks. Are there enough developers to go around? Are we having like a developer supply crunch in the market? Like, what's the situation with that?
Yeah, I think our community or Web3, there tends to be a feeling that hey, there's never enough Web3 developers. And there tends to be a feeling that, hey, if there's a Web3 developer, we need to just poach them away. But I think the reality of the picture is very different, where there's so many Web2 developers in this conference here that have this inkling of, hey, there's something new here. There's a new movement here that will power the new internet. And there's so much potential here. And I think if I were a recruiter in a Web2 big tech company, I would be afraid right now because all of the intellect is going into Web3. So I think on the short term, yes, we have a shortage of engineers, but that's just because the industry is so new. But on the long run, we're winning against all of these big tech.
Abby, curious for your thoughts on that for sure.
I just have like one critical perspective about like retaining talent in Web3 and crypto is that the space is so hyper capitalized right now that I actually find that it's usually more beneficial to go out and start your own thing than work for another project. And I think that there's been a couple established ecosystems that have like really worked on this, but it actually takes a different frame on kind of your protocol ecosystem to make sure that you're incentivizing and retaining developers and contributors in the long term. Like this is why we have like a shortage of like Rust devs, because everybody worked at Parity and then they all made a shit ton of money and then they quit and now they're all don't want to work on anything anymore, right? And so I feel like there's like this balance, which is like a very people problem. And I think that while we of course, like I think everything is shifting towards like Web3. It's also about navigating these like negative externalities that we see in the space that are kind of making, maybe fighting against us a little bit.
Robbie, what are you seeing on that front, the hiring side?
I totally co-sign everything both of you said. I would agree. I think that the golden handcuffs are not as appealing anymore in the Web2 space. And developers are now becoming very bullish on developing for the future, and they're more interested, I believe, in community development and developing tooling that is going to ideally, create a future that we genuinely believe in, opposed to, perhaps the day in, day out. Obviously, I understand everyone has like their own situation, but I do very much believe that Web 2 people, and perhaps there are a number here, are here for a reason, right? And it's because you're curious, and that curiosity is grossly intoxicating once you start to dig in, and kind of once you get in it, you can't go back. So I think it's inevitable.
It's also just like, again, everybody's building with each other. So when you're building, you're part of a larger ecosystem, which I think is different than kind of like traditional Web 2 models where you're building within one scope. And since there's more collaboration, I think that actually creates more space for developers to flourish and have more personal gain and also kind of like develop themselves. And so I feel like it's very unique, and I think that we'll see with DAOs and with these large protocol ecosystems that are also decentralizing the way that we collaborate. We'll see even more developer interest and space for developers to kind of, just in general, like thrive, which I think will continue attracting and retaining for sure.
I would edge our community into one aspect here, which is discoverability. If I'm a dev in Web 2, how do I discover all of these cool projects that are being built right now? There's like DAOs forming left and right, but what are these DAOs doing? What's their roadmap? What is the appeal? And what is my incentive for contributing to a DAO? I think there's so many cool projects out there, but I'm a dev. I want to figure out how I can hack on some stuff. There's very little discoverability in our space right now.
So you three are all very much on the ground, seeing how this situation is evolving over time. I guess I want to get just a clear picture of what the pipeline is looking like. I know we're talking now pretty much exclusively about Web 2 devs making the jump into Web 3 technologies. Is that where the predominance of new entrants to the developer space are coming from? Is there a role that university blockchain clubs are playing? Is it established devs making the jump, or new devs learning this out the gate? Is there anything emerging on that front that you can speak to? Robbie, I put you on the spot for that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's interesting, and it's a little bit of everything, right? What's really incredible is as like developer portals are being created, I personally know a lot of people who weren't developers who are becoming Web3 developers out of the gate. And I had always thought, the adoption of Web 2 to Web 3 was kind of the more natural flow to, get developers interested in this tooling. But it's blowing my mind that like their first, repositories are dealing with like Web 3. And I think this is incredible. I also believe education is everything, right? Because if you just have people kind of coming in without perhaps like understanding what's interesting or why it should be interesting, as long as we are, creating systems that are very like digestible for a complex topic and exciting people through education, and then kind of putting them on a pathway, we have this Web 2 to Web 3, we have the new developers, we have, keep retaining Web 3 developers. All of this is kind of happening simultaneously.
Yeah, I think that there's like also different pathways based off of the type of development, right? There's like the traditional turnover of like Spotify or some big corp lays off a bunch of people, and then that influx is captured by the other corps within the decentralized ecosystems. You could talk about think about the Coinbase and their talent acquisition right now. But what I think is really important is for us to be supporting the development that you just talked about, right? Which is like discovery through education and accessibility, hackathons, finding languages to build on, and to have and enable open source experimentation, which then leads to getting involved with different protocol communities in a decentralized and online-based way. And I think that that's really the spirit of Web3, is like supporting these more emergent, nebulous forms of developer communities, and figuring out how we can create the space for developers not only to discover, find those, and then understand them through education, accessibility, and documentation, but then also find their role and belonging in them. And that's kind of like where the community work is. Very like community thing, right? But how do you incentivize and then bring them along and empower them throughout that entire process? And I think that that's like really the spirit of Web3. And I think if we can nail that and do that really well, that creates like a net better situation than most ways that we kind of find, discover, and retain developers right now.
All right, well, that was a very lovely forward-looking sentiment, and I would like to end that panel on that note. Thank you very much, Abby. Please join me in thanking our wonderful panel. We're going to get you to the next topic. Thanks a bunch, guys. You did great. All of yous. We love you. The best. All right, thanks everybody. See you around.